If you're on YouTube right now, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes. And drop a like and a comment. Thank you. So, Mr. Samuel Magee.
Hey, man.
Thanks for joining us today. You are the owner, the creator, and of Shop Talk Studios.
Yeah.
And you reached out to us to, kind of come on board and tell the story that you have. And before we started recording, I mentioned to you that I watched your TEDx. And number one, I think that was really cool. I didn't know we had a TEDx that happened here in West Monroe.
Yeah, me neither.
But it was great. And then the documentary that you participated in. Did you do the documentary?
Yes.
That was your production.
Yeah, filmed, directed, and created by
That
Shop
was
Talk
really
Studio.
good. I mean, very, very professional.
Thank you.
I think I may have seen other works that you've done before, but that one was absolutely great. A good story in it, but just the quality camera work and just kind of how it was edited was really good as well.
Thank you. There was a lot of really, really talented people that worked on that with me. So,
all right, so let's jump in here. So, who is Samuel? I know it's a loaded question. They're really big. Let's start off a little bit more. Where'd you grow up?
man, I'm originally from Gray, Louisiana.
Gray.
Gray is in between Houma and Thibodaux, close to Shriever. So I grew up there, and
Small town.
yeah, small town. We lived across. At first, we lived across from just a big cane field. There wasn't nothing but cane on one side and then houses on the other side of the highway. But yeah, I grew up there. I went to school in Houma, Thibodaux, and then like 7th, 8th grade, I went to a boarding school.
Okay.
So I left to an all boys boarding school in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, at Brothers of Sacred Heart.
What led to that?
My stepdad was an alumni there. My father had passed when I was young, and my brother passed very quickly after that. And I mean, just being candid, I was a pretty rough kid. I just lost my dad, lost my brother, and my behavior went sideways. And mom was, mom had one son that she just lost, and then the other one's here, and her husband had passed. So it was a big mess, man. It shifted the trajectory of our lives forever. And so in response to kind of like my behavior and grades, my stepfather was like, "Hey, I'm going to send you to this school that I went to, and you'll go live there and do your thing." And I mean, my behavior as a young man was so poor that like I was bouncing around. I would go to boarding school for a year or two, and then we had the storm. So then we came back, and then I would misbehave my way out of this or that, and then just kind of a burden, during that time. But yeah, so that's went to high school there, and then I know we're gonna get into it anyway. So like the drugs and alcohol started. Man, like 2000, I don't know, by senior year, really senior. I didn't drink much, but I was.
Now,
smoking.
you graduated from the boarding school?
No, so I got asked to leave the boarding school. Asked to leave in probably my junior year.
Okay.
So somewhere at either the beginning or the end of my sophomore year. And came back home to Gray. There's a public school in Gray called H.L. Bourgeois, where I graduated from. But when I came back, I only ended up having, because the curriculum at the boarding school, and then compared to the public school, I had extra credits, even though I was a poor student.
Right.
So I brought those back and was able to just do like a half a day for senior year, and really that was where I was starting to slip off into doing stuff I wasn't supposed to do.
So was it just a friend group that you were around, just not the best?
No. I mean, I was a pretty isolated guy. I had friends, I would say as much as anybody did. Wasn't a very popular guy through school, or had a lot of friends in that regard. But like I had a group of friends that I was with. But no, it was isolation. So like there were a lot of things that happened in the home with my stepdad, and there was some abuse there, there's some trauma there, and I've been seeing a therapist and have seen a therapist in my sobriety and in adulthood, and so all this stuff is fine to talk about, but there was some abuse there, and that abuse kind of set me apart from my core family, and my mom was estranged with my father's family. So our family went from like a rather large like group of people to a very small group of people, some by choice, some by like circumstance. But yeah, so I was pretty much a pretty isolated guy. I had like 2 or 3 buddies that would do that, and we would, they did certain things and I did certain things. And it when we moved to college, when we moved to Baton Rouge, so I'll back it up, but graduated. I was a younger graduate, so like I aged into my years, so I didn't turn 18 till I was already graduated. So moved to Baton Rouge with a buddy of mine who actually is my business partner today, which is amazing. But we moved to Baton Rouge and lived there for a while. And then in Baton Rouge, it just degraded. I mean, from there, it degraded. So this is 2009,
Did you go to college?
Yes. So I didn't graduate. I've been to college 3 times. So I went to culinary school when I first moved to Baton Rouge. And the drugs just overtook everything. And I dropped out. And maybe 4 or 5 months into that program, and then just worked in Baton Rouge.
What was your drug of choice?
So opiates, heroin was where I landed, but it started with pills. So it started with like, we would take pills. Honestly, man, if I was describing it to you, we started taking drugs like that. I mean, we all abused them, and the people that I was around abused them, in recreational ways and so on and so forth. But we all like, or at least for me, I didn't have like a deep knowledge of what opiates were, like what were the consequences of those things. Like I knew they were bad and I knew I shouldn't take them, you know what I mean? But I didn't know the like degree of what was going to happen. And so it was, a few years of doing that, and then you wake up and you have a habit, like you're 21, 22, and you've got a habit and you're sick. You don't know why you're sick. You're piecing this together. Your brain's starting to connect the dots, but then it's just a chase from there.
So how were you able to afford the drugs? Because my understanding, that's one of the more expensive habits to have, right?
Manipulation and taking things from people I cared about and becoming the worst person I'd ever been in my life, but as a result of the choices I was making. So, I mean, you go. Are you familiar with like 12-step programs at all? Or I mean, we talked about
a little bit.
Yeah. So the amends process is one of the most important processes that we go through when we get sober, and
you destroyed a lot of relationships.
You've left a tornado of wreckage behind you, and it's tough because this is very philosophical stuff, but like it's very easy to look at that and see all the wreckage and don't see the person anymore. And it's hard to separate the fact that like one is a disease and one is a human being. And like together they do these things that are really terrible. But once the disease is, treated, there's still a loving, kind person that's there that was trapped, there's no other way to say it.
So I've personally never had any addictions on that level. And I've seen a lot of, people that I grew up with that were good people, good families. And to see that addiction consume them so much, and from an outsider looking in, I'm just like, that has got to be such a demon because, these people didn't start out on that path. I mean, they have all the resources available to help them, but they just can't seem to kick it.
It's hard. There is, first off, for our community here, dude, this town is on another plane of existence for sobriety. So I think I could be wrong on this number, so don't quote me on it, but I think it's somewhere between like 700 and 800 people every 30 days become residents of this city because of the sober living and rehabs and options they have in this town. So this town is a shining gem of an example for recovery in the state of Louisiana.
I did not know that.
Yes. So, but with that comes an incredibly, there's the other side of that, right? So like if it has a really strong recovery system, then there's also going to be like a very, very weak and bad addiction problem, But I'm saying that to say this place of all places has probably got the best reception of like understanding that problem of like how why can't they just get it, or how do I see past the wreckage that they've created and like see a person and be empathetic again? Like, how do I do that? And it's really comes from an education of like, hey, this is a disease. You can't lump it into other things. It's different. It stands alone, but it is a disease. It is at some point they are responsible for getting it and having it, but they're not responsible for what's going on while they're inside of it. Yeah. And so it's tough. It's tough to. Once that distinction is made, though, it's a lot easier for us to get back on a level of like, hey, this is a human being. Like, they are alive. Their life has value, you know?
Walk me through. So we're in Baton Rouge. We have fallen off the deep end. I think it'd be a good way to put it, right?
Yeah.
And we're not really doing good at treading water.
No. So Baton Rouge was just me getting better at doing drugs. Was all it really was. I lived there and worked there, had friends there. Was there for 4 or 5 years, and then I flitted around. So then I would go to New Orleans, and I lived there for a year or two, and then I actually traveled for a good while as well. So there was like I got a while hair up my butt and packed up my car and I had a 6-week-old puppy and a bicycle, and we took off and drove 38,000 miles in like a 6-month period, and and just went go ride around. And I had a little stint working as a deckhand offshore, which was probably like the shortest period of sobriety I would have from 2009 till 2017. So it was kind of a, I worked there for a year as an inland deckhand. But yeah, so sorry, we get through Baton Rouge. Well, when I started using heroin was when things really, slid out fast. And so I had lived in Nashville for a little while and with the habit, and then found my way back to New Orleans. Well, this last time, I know it's not so cohesive, so I'm trying to bring it back together, but you got to also remember, dude, I can't get dates right.
Sure.
Looking back. So like, I'll think it was like 5 or 6 years, and I'm like, no, Sam, you're 33. It was 3 years.
Right.
But anyway, I get to New Orleans, and I had a buddy with me. I won't say his name, but I had a buddy with me who still had a car, and man, I think I had robbed him, and so there went the last bridge. It was like the last person. Mom wasn't talking to me. Ex-girlfriends weren't talking to me. Friends, brothers, cousins, nobody wanted to fool with. They hadn't spoken to me for several months, if not years at that point. And so he left, and I didn't have a place to go. So I couldn't go home with the habit, which was, I was in New Orleans too. I was in Palmer Park, which is in the corner of Claiborne and Carrollton. And I would walk up and down that street right there flying a sign. So I'd be either at the bridge off of the interstate right there on Claiborne, or I'd be down by Mate Della Rosa Church on Carrollton, close to Oak Street. And so what I would do is I didn't have a place to go. So that first night I slept in the park, and I had like a little backpack with maybe a change of clothes. And I managed to convince my first cousin to come bring me a quilt, an old quilt that I had. I guess I left it in his car or something like that. But he was able to do that. He brought me some food, and then then next thing you know, it's 2 years later, and I had just 18 months, 2 years had just been like that. Walking from Palmer Park to the bridge to Oak Street and sleeping in front of the church.
How much money could you make a day?
$300-$400 flying a sign. So that was also the problem too. Is you're talking about you had mentioned it earlier, but in an addiction that costs $200-$300 a day is it's absurd. I mean, it's an insane amount of money. Like if I made $300 a day today, I would be tickled. You know what I mean? Like that means I've done great, and have been really working my ass off. Working my butt off. But yeah, I mean, it was an expensive habit to have. But manipulation is a terrible thing. I mean, you can prey on people's, sympathies. You're preying on the things you do to get to that place are terrible. I mean, they just are. It's hard to describe. You'll do whatever it takes to get that.
So I would take it that if your habit was as much as you were making a day, you would choose the habit over food?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then you steal the food. You don't even buy the food. So it's, in a place like New Orleans or Baton Rouge or a bigger city, it's easier for someone in that situation to continue on a situation like that, right? Now, if you're here in Monroe, West Monroe, it's significantly harder to survive out on the street. Like there's not as many resources available, and this goes both ways. It's good and a bad thing, but like there's not as many resources available. There's not as many altruistic things going on in a community. It's like in New Orleans, if you knew where to be and when to be there, you could get food, you could get fresh needles, you could get water, you could get sometimes even money. Like it just depended on what it was. So there was ways to facilitate this, and you game it. You start gaming that system the longer you're in it. Because
Right.
it's how you're living. Like
Sure.
so.
So what was the turning point in New Orleans?
One of my favorite stories, man, is it's the first time looking back I was aware that God was doing something in my life that I hadn't seen or felt him for as long as I could remember.
So before you go into that, you mentioned God in your life. To this point, what was your relationship? How had you had a relationship with God to this point?
Oh no, I had.
Were you ever in church? Were you exposed to
Oh
it?
yeah, dude. I went to
up?
a Brothers of the Sacred Heart Catholic school. I mean, we got the church in all its glory, but no, I was upset. I was mad at God for when my brother passed. And the older I got and the more that scenario played out and like the wreckage that it caused and like all of the things that happened as a result of it, I didn't want nothing to do with that, dude. You know what I mean? Like I didn't understand it. I didn't think I in my brain said something like, if that's what God is, I just don't want him. You know what I mean? And then I would get angry when we would have conversations about it, because people would speak from a place of like well-meaning, but would say things that were like, oh my God, so insensitive to what people were going through.
Sure.
And, and just out of sheer naive, not knowing what's going on, but
Right.
that's the problem, so, but yeah, no relationship whatsoever. Mm-mm. So we were, and I say that I know that was God operating my life as like a hindsight thing. You know what I mean? Like I knew that at the time I was not aware in that scenario.
Okay.
I'm looking back in sobriety and like piecing these moments where I should be dead, and I'm going, oh wow, like this is happening. So, yeah, it was, the church, Monte Dalla Rosa, usually they would leave their doors open. So usually you could get into the sanctuary whenever, and you would find 3 or 4 people sleeping in there. And then the kind of the deal was you would just get up and be out of there before service started or something like that. That way you weren't like, a burden to anybody. But they used to keep the doors open. Well, one night, I had a particularly like long walk back to where I was going, and I was already sick and wasn't, I was withdrawing and just crashing, just degrading. And so I was licking my wounds and headed to the church to go sleep for the night, which I didn't do often, but it was one of those nights where it would be nice to not have to like go set up in a nook somewhere under a house or something. And so I go to do it. The doors are locked. The doors on the church are locked. And I was like, daggone, man, that's the first time these doors have ever been locked. And so I set up right there in front of the church at the bottom of the steps, and I had flown a sign that said I was going to go to Nashville or something. I can't remember exactly what the sign said, but I said like, hey, I want to leave town kind of thing. Well, it's like 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I am halfway asleep, on the ground. And this guy, his name's Chris. I won't say his last name, but his name's Chris, and I've gotten to speak to him too in sobriety, which is pretty cool. But if you live in the city, you get used to seeing people. We were talking about this earlier before the podcast. You get used to seeing people like that. So like you don't shy away as much. Like here people shy away quite a bit. Like they don't really want to fool with it. But so this guy Chris comes up to me and he goes, man, hey, I know what's up. Like I'm not giving you no money. He's like, but I will buy you a bus ticket anywhere you want to go. And that's 4 o'clock in the morning, dude, in New Orleans. It's not. You hear these kind of things all the time, and no one ever does. No one ever falls through on stuff like that. So he puts a gallon of water down. I tell him I want to go to Nashville, and I think I just spit that out because my buddy lived there. Well, the sun had come up and it was summertime and it was hot, you know, and so as soon as that sun comes up, you're packing up your stuff and trying to find some shade somewhere. And so I'm packing up, and I'm drinking this gallon of water that this dude's left. And here he comes, bro, like Honda Civic. You've been in New Orleans, you know, the neutral grounds, just skips into the neutral ground right up onto the curb, like shoulder checks this Honda Civic, and he's waving a megabus ticket out the window. You know what megabus is?
No.
Okay, so you can buy a bus ticket, like a national bus ticket, anywhere you want, for $1 if you buy it like in a month in advance. And so it's these double-decker buses, and it is a ruckus, dude. Like, it is.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's so. Think the most expensive ticket's probably like $40 to go anywhere, but it is a ruckus of people on there that are from all walks of life. It's crazy. So he's waving this megabus ticket out the window. He's like, "Come on, man, we gotta go." And so I guess just my head followed my feet, and I got in the car with him, and he took me to the bus station, getting closer in the Bywater, and off we went to Nashville. And so there's a whole host of other things that happened from say Nashville till I got to Monroe. But the gist is I bounced around from like rehab to hospital to the street, but very short period of time, like about a year. And so it was kind of like finding my footing. I was still had a lot of my own prejudices and a lot of my own better thinking, and I thought I knew the right things to do, and I thought I was the smartest guy in the room, you know, all that. So
was Nashville the first time you went to rehab?
No. So the first time I attempted to go was well before that. There was a place in Morgan City that I had tried to go to.
So you tried to go to it.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what that means.
Sure. So Morgan City, for example, was a state facility. And at the time, I had a very high use of heroin. And once I don't know what the actual recommendation or threshold is, but once you get to a certain amount of use per day at that time, some facilities couldn't take you in because the withdrawal symptoms may be too severe, and they may not be able to they may not be able to handle that case.
Right.
But the problem is most addicts lie all the way through. So I was in intake lying about my usage and then withdrawing on a higher, a higher threshold. So I was hospitalized from that point. So it was like 2 or 3 nights there. They couldn't manage my symptoms down. And this is like thrashing in the bed. This is like, I'm not aware of what's going on. You're writhing in the bed. They're changing your sheets because you can't control your body. You know, it's just this constant, it's a nightmare. It's hell, And so, you're going through that, and then you just kind of wake up and you're an EMT, you're on your way to emergent medicine, and then you're discharged from there. And then like you can either opt to go somewhere else at this time. Now it's gotten better since then as far as like you're discharging patients like that. They don't really do that. Now you really have to have like a
plan set up.
Yeah. Like a post after sober.
So did you go willingly this time? So the first time you go to rehab, was it by choice? Was it an intervention?
No, never an intervention. I had one of the most heartbreaking moments that intervened in my life was I had stolen from my mom. I had taken jewelry and pawned it. I had taken my father's, inherited guns and pawned them. And, fortunately we were able to get a lot of that stuff back, and then some's lost forever. And I'll always have that debt on my head. And, so took all those things. And then one day, I had been manipulating her for years, and my aunt came over. And my aunt was like, I guess just a little more savvy to what was going on. And maybe my mom was willfully ignorant. I'm not sure. I can only speculate there. But like, my aunt knew something fishy was going on and couldn't quite piece it together. Because, dude, we were addicts. And like, in that part of our life, we were very good about keeping it as,
right.
You can tell something's up, but you're not really sure what's up. So, She called me out, man. I was standing on the front porch, and this is in Thibodeau. So I was standing on the front porch, and God, I had mom upset about something. I had manipulated her feelings and made her feel just terrible. And boy, my aunt picked up on something, and she walked out, and like a good Southern woman, she comes out. She says, "I don't know what's going on, but something's going on, and you're not welcome at this house anymore." And it was, I think, because me and my mom had been through so much together, like losing my father, losing my brother, my addiction, her struggles, we'd been through so much. So I think I never expected to hear that, like, you're not welcome here, you know what I mean? And that was kind of like everything pivoted there.
Sure.
And then I didn't come back, you know what I mean? I didn't come back until I was so sick I was going to die, and then my pawpaw, who's passed recently, my pawpaw is the only one, not the only one, but one of the ones that like never quite gave up and gave out on me. Had every right to, but chose not to. And fortunately, we ended up getting to have like a really good, close relationship before he passed, which was absolutely awesome. But yeah, so I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought on what the question was.
That's okay. We're talking about going into rehab when the first time was.
Yes.
So now you're back in Nashville.
Yeah.
You go to rehab. Would this be the second time?
Yes. So, and it's actually in a town called Hohenwald, Tennessee.
Okay.
Which is a little bit east of Memphis, I want to say, or northeast of Memphis. But
what led you to go to that rehab?
So, I got to Nashville and I was still using, and so my buddy, my best friend, he came pick me up from downtown and was going to let me detox on his couch. Well, his poor girlfriend was not familiar with this world at all, and he had been doing a little better himself, so it was kind of like we dropped a bomb on her, and I got really sick and they took me to the hospital. Well, when I got to that hospital, I just told the nurses at the ER, I said, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, like I don't know what to do, y'all just tell me, y'all just tell me what to do and we'll do it. I was completely broken, and so they took my paraphernalia from me. They were already checking me into the ER because I was like really sick. And man, I woke up. I remember going into the ER. This is at TriStar Hospital, and I've tried to find the nurse that did this, but I can't. And I woke up in a cab, and the cab fare had like a $280 fare on it. And the last memory I have was like going to my buddy's house. Really clear memory is like going to my buddy's house in Nashville. So I don't know what's happened. It feels like I just woke up a week later. And that's essentially what happened. It was like 4 days after I got there, I ended up in a cab. So I start freaking out, like I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have any money. I've got this cab fare is just ticking, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. And so I just ride this cab, very sick still, not sure what's going on. And he pulls up at this place called Buffalo Valley, which is the name of the rehab that I went to. And I think it was a Tennessee State facility. It's a bit of a blur, but great people. So I get there and I'm like, hey man, I don't know what to tell you, but like, I don't have this money for a cab. Like I don't, like I don't even know how I got in this cab. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. The nurses paid for it. And so I was like, excuse me. And that was brief of an exchange with him. He said the nurses paid for it. And then I got out the cab because a tech came, got me out the cab and, brought me inside to detox. I stayed at that facility for quite a while. That was like a facility that had options to stay there up to like 120 days. And I was there for about 40 something.
And all this is voluntary. Nobody's holding you there.
Yeah. Well, you're getting, if you go to the ER and you're withdrawing or you want to get help with drugs or something like that, it's a PEC. So they're going to hold you for 72 hours. And that is without your choice. Like you can't really do nothing after that point. You're stuck in that. Now there are some people that get committed and things like that to these facilities, and yes, but no, never on my behalf. It was you say like a voluntary thing, and really it's more like this is the most desperate I can be, and this is the only place that I can be. You're trapped into a circumstance that you can't do anything about, basically. So
how long did you stay at that facility?
About 40 days. I really liked that place. At that time, it was the closest thing I had gotten to stability in a long time, and I related to a lot of the guys and girls that were there. And so, like, I felt, I didn't feel alone for the first time. So I stayed a bit longer than I expected I would, and also discharging out, not being a resident, meant that I was going to have to find either like a solution back home that I could go to, or just go back to being on the street again. And so that was tough because it was, I didn't know what to do. And so the lack of information, and I just landed right back in it, and it would be a year from that rehab to New Day Recovery in Monroe, give or take.
So when you get discharged from this place, you're pretty much probably walking out with just clothes on your back. no money,
Yeah, absolutely.
no plan.
Absolutely.
So it's almost as if you are set up just to not placing blame on anyone, but just the natural course of things, you're set up to fall right back into that trap. I mean, is that a fair way of looking at it?
It is. It is. And then I would say today it has changed. So it still happens. There's still turn and burn places that like don't really have the best interests of their clients at heart,
Yeah.
and they just get them in and get them out for the insurance money. That still exists and will always exist as long as man has greed. You know what I mean? Like that's not going anywhere. But at that time, there wasn't as much readily like available information. You got to remember, we didn't have the fentanyl crisis yet. So we're still riding on the backs of the opioid epidemic that came out of like dirty doctors and, you know, pill farms and stuff like that out of Houston and Florida. And like we would drive to these places like, you know, 3 and 4 times a month to go get, you know, falsified. There's all kinds of stuff that was going on at that time. So that was what we were riding on the back of. There wasn't any big like Purdue Pharma wasn't getting investigated. You know, there wasn't a lot of attention there. And so the options as I knew them at the time was I could go to a Suboxone clinic, which was expensive and there was no Medicaid and didn't come on that, you know, so it was, you either had to pay out of pocket or get granted into that.
Right.
And getting granted was difficult because it may mean a whole host of other issues. That was one. Then the other was state facilities. So state facilities at that time, dude, they were dirty. They were nasty.
Yep.
Like they were ill-equipped. They had not enough staff. You know, they had no money. It was not a place conducive to healing, you know, at
Right.
all. So those were your two options that were on the table. So when so to answer your question, yes, you have to, there's a whole host of different models and people that are more qualified to talk about this topic.
Sure.
But there's approaches where like we incentivize addicts in recovery to do well, and that's always going to lead to a better result because it's a economics question down to philosophy, and then we got to get God involved because he's involved. You know what I mean? So like there's got to be a conversation about God, the economics of the scenario, and like also what's the right thing to do. Like you can't. So I'll give you an example. I stayed in a mission in Redding, California. And I took a bus from Monroe, Louisiana to Redding. This was a period of attempted sobriety. And so I landed in this mission. Mission is run by a bunch of like altruistic, good people, you know, that care and really want to like help these people into a better position, and not temporarily. They want to get you the tools and the job and all that. So really good place. Well, Department of Corrections would drop off inmates that were getting released from prison on the corner of the mission at, say, 3 or 4 in the morning. And some of these guys might be violent criminals or gang members or something like that. Well, they would attack people that would live in the mission. So I think that is a greater example of what I'm saying is like there was so little consideration for like the person and more about like the bottom dollar at that time. Like that was what it was.
And you've since seen a change
For sure.
in everything, even outside of the, you know, Northeast Louisiana.
I can't speak for like the rehabs, but I would say that like after having lived in this community, so I met my wife here, our son was born here, you know, like this is where I live, you know, like this place has given me a second chance at life, you know, so there's outside of that though, I've seen that, dude, you have so many people on the grassroots level in Monroe, West Monroe, that are out there doing hard frontline work, and they are kicking butt. You know what I mean? They're struggling. They need as much help as they can get, but like, dude,
the help is here.
Yes, and there's people behind the help that are like sincere and have good hearts. And fortunately, some of them are like my friends, and I get to watch that unfold. And they do, you know, the documentary is us trying to help. So that was done. I didn't mean to segue on you, but Donnie and Phil put that money up. Initially we started with like $7,700 was what we were going to do to produce that film. So we had a couple of shoot days we wanted to book. Long story short, that film ended up costing like $30,000. You know,
Wow.
By the time we were done with everything and labor and money, no one made $1 off of it. We paid the crew and we paid the post production, and then the rest of that is literally just the cost to make it. It was a nod to try to bring more awareness and bridge that gap between like this Christian ideology and the secular ideologies that are both doing the same thing. You know, they're both after the same goal, you know, which is freedom from this addiction and freedom from drugs and alcohol.
So after you left the rehab in Tennessee, how long of a time period was it? Did that occur from when you made the move to Monroe?
There was a year stretch, give or take, from Memphis to landing in West Monroe at New Day.
Okay. So what was a catalyst that got you to West Monroe?
Oh God, fluke got me here. God, you know, I mean, it was random chance. I didn't know anything about this town. It was a Google look at, like, with a counselor inside of a hospital looking to figure out which rehab I could go to. And then, like, all this, it's at the top, you know, there was at the top of the list of rehabs in Louisiana. And then they called, they accepted the Medicaid that I had. And then boom, I was there.
Bus ticket to West Monroe.
Yeah. They put me on a Medicaid transport and just sit me right over. Landed here. I thought all that West Monroe had was a rehab and a paper mill. That was all I thought y'all had when I pulled up. I was like, what is this place?
When you arrived at New Day, what was that experience like?
Oh man, it was the staff at New Day at that time. That was 7 years ago. They were amazing. I mean, everything from, I don't remember my intake because I came in high, and but I remember having conversations about it. It was very hard for me physically and you know, in every other way, but the staff they were so great. I mean, they took care of me every step of the way, and I had heroin detox is pretty rough, and you know, it's akin to like alcohol detox, and but it won't kill you. It just really hurts, and it hurts a lot. And so I couldn't eat. Couldn't eat anything, couldn't hold anything down. And then I was sweating profusely. So I would have to, like, change shirts 2 or 3 times a day. And then I didn't sleep. And I wasn't on certain medications that you could take because I was trying to quit everything and trying to do it this cold turkey way. But Tex would let me stay up with them. You know, I would get up and, you know, I'd fall asleep for an hour, sweat my bed out, get up, change my sheets, and didn't want to go back to sleep. So I would get up and sit in the hallway and chat with the tech for, you know, 8 hours while he was on his, you know, rounds, and I would try to go back to sleep. And they let me do that every night for 20 something days, you know, while I detoxed. And
it takes that long to.
Oh, it takes longer than that. It takes you have everything from post-acute withdrawal syndrome, which is an absolute nightmare. So I had my last detox symptom leave on day 67 of sobriety.
Wow.
And that was the sweats. So it was like I if you would come into my room at Kingdom Recovery, I would have my shirts laid out on the bed with the fan blowing on my shirts because I'd have to change them out so often. Fortunately, I worked on a brick crew, so I didn't really need to worry about it too much. I was going to be sweating all day anyway. But when I wasn't working, I would have to lay out my stuff so that I would have dry clothes to wear.
So how many days did you stay there at New Day?
30 days.
30 days. After New Day, where did you go?
To Kingdom Recovery.
So tell me how that process was and how you got connected. So is New Day, are they automatically connected with Kingdom?
They had a close relationship at the time, but no, I think it's always there's multiple different programs, and they all just go to these rehabs to make themselves aware, like, hey, we have beds here, we have beds here. So it's very much a, like, 5 guys might go to Kingdom, 5 guys might go to Sober Zone, you know, something like that. So
you leave New Day, you go to Kingdom Recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that experience.
I
think the documentary, number one, tells a good story of that experience. But for those, I'm sure not everybody's watched.
It's not out yet. So you got got a private link. We're it's currently in film festival submission. So we have 4 festivals that we've submitted it to, and we're waiting to hear back if it gets accepted to those festivals before we can release it.
So I am familiar with Kingdom Recovery, but watching that documentary gives you a raw inside look at, I don't know if tough love is the right word. They stress structure, right? And you got to keep that mind active, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me about your intake with Kingdom Recovery.
So you got to be talking about David, though. If you're talking about that, you got to be talking about David. So David is one of my best friends, still to this day. And but yeah, so the story of me getting the kingdom was I didn't know where I was going. I had asked Doug, who's no longer affiliated with New Day, but Doug was. I said, Doug, where am I going to go, man? He said, well, I got you a spot, man. I got you a spot. And I was like, cool. And I didn't say nothing else. And then if you saw the guy, David, dude, he comes barreling in like somebody owes him money inside the rehab. And he's like, Sam? And I was like, yeah. I get in the truck. Dude, I get in the truck. Like in the film, he's got this body-sized dent on the side of the truck. He's not saying much of anything. He's telling me I'm going to Kingdom. He's got like 4 or 5 ground rules, and they're all pretty like ultra specific rules, so you know that someone had a very specific problem,
Right.
like that he's trying to not do again. So I'm kind of like humored by all of it, but yeah, I didn't talk to that dude again for like 90 days, and we had this guy. He was running the program at the time. So the way the program works is you had Kingdom, who is the David, who is the director of Kingdom. Then you would have house managers, and then like maybe a program manager in the middle. So like it would be David, program manager, house managers, and then everybody that lived inside. Well, when I got there, there was 3 houses. There was the yellow house, the brown house, and the old trailer. And the old trailer was in the old assembly parking lot in that spot. And so I was there for like 40 or 50 days, something like that. And the program manager relapsed, and he had the keys to like the house ride. He had, he was this whole thing, and he relapsed in a glorious way. And so when he relapsed, long story short, David made me program manager, and I was only like 45 days sober. I'm still detoxing somewhat. And so now I've got like all these guys that are older than me, and like guys that would normally never associate with, and like now we're all trying to like do this program together. And so I would have to go kick guys out, and I would have to like take my shoes off because I thought I was gonna have to fight somebody because they're it's anyway. But yeah, so the first early days was very much Wild West. David hadn't quite figured out like what this thing was, and Donnie hadn't quite figured out what this thing was, and so it was growing and changing. But we had a great group of dudes, and those group of guys, the fellowship, the camaraderie, the accountability, I had an interesting experience, man, because I did both. So like at first I had a sponsor in a 12-step program, and I had a sponsor through the CR program. And so I was in both, and they were both running parallel. I had this very deep, resentment towards God coming into sobriety. And everyone is telling me like, hey dude, you're going to have to figure out God. Like not figure out, but you're going to have to get with God. Like there's no piece of this equation that doesn't involve a spiritual experience. Like you are going to have a relationship with a higher power if you want this to work. Now, fortunately, I was around a bunch of people that were open-minded enough to not force anything. They didn't push Christ on me. They didn't push this on me. They made available all of it. They said, hey, look, you have to do these things because they're house rules, which was like you got to go to church on Sunday, and you have to go to a step study, which is both of those in any regard are healthy alternatives for what I would normally be doing. You know what I mean? So sure, that's an easy rule to follow, but that was it. That was the only like specific rule they had about how I had to look at things or do things that could affect me. And so that open-mindedness, it allowed me to come to my Christianity slower and more gradually, which is exactly what I needed, because I was so resentful and so angry. There was no way I was gonna just flip, So I needed to be educated. And
you need that self-discovery.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I had to go through some things in sobriety that I hadn't. So with drugs and alcohol, we're treating something and they're working, and then one day they just stop working. You know what I mean? So like for me, I was coping with the loss of my brother, the loss of my father, the abuse that I experienced as a young boy, the abuse in high school, just the traumas throughout my life, the near-death incidents, like the violence, all those things, I was treating those things. And so when you lose the drugs and alcohol, you're still left with those things. They're still there.
Right.
So although you've made this one great decision, you still have a lot of work to do. You still have a lot of things to heal. Generational curses, stuff like that, stuff you don't want to send back down the pipe.
Right.
But because of the 12-step program and my relationship with God and my friends, I was able to treat and address those things in a way that has been conducive to me. It's helped me grow as a person. But yeah, that open-mindedness would have, if it wasn't there, I wouldn't have stayed. And there's no way.
The from a community standpoint, the sober living houses that we have, and
It's a tough topic.
yeah, Kingdom Recovery is not the only organization that offers the sobriety houses that are out there. And the community a lot of times will think, not in my neighborhood. I don't want that in my neighborhood. But how important is it to those men and women that are in the sobriety houses to be in a neighborhood of high-functioning people versus being in a neighborhood to where that addiction is still running rampant?
Oh, dude, you're hitting the nail on the head. So I have a friend of mine, Terry Brown. She's one of my closest friends. She's been great. Her and her husband are awesome. But Terry, she runs Sober Zone. So she's a female running an all-men's program, and she is an absolute amazing person. Well, she deals a lot with people and their prejudice and their concerns and how, if a crime happens, like I live in the Garden District off of right near Lexington and all that. And I'm in that, a couple of Facebook groups for that area, and I don't really contribute, but I'm listening. And I see people will something will go missing or something will get vandalized or there's some petty crime or something happens. And then the first inkling is to go after those sober houses. And Terry, I have seen and been around and know that there's outliers everywhere.
Sure.
There's always a bad egg in everyone, in the good communities, the bad communities, whatever. It doesn't matter. So if you can sideline that and have a realistic perspective as a human being, that there's outliers everywhere, then you can start to see that it's not them. They don't work that way. And then if they do, they have swift consequences for those actions, the same that you or I would experience in sobriety. There's still penalties for things like this. So there's a study, and I don't know the quotes exactly, but there is a study that says this recidivism rate goes down incredibly if they are able to engage in a longer program like sober living. So the sober living is essential to bridge the gap between rehab institution to a contributing member of society. If we don't have something there, you just have this large swath of people that remain unhealed, untreated.
Right.
Dude, you got to think some of these guys, they don't even have habits that you and I take for granted. They don't know how to make a bed. They never learned how. You know what I'm saying? They don't know what general hygiene is because no one taught them.
Right.
It's an unfair expectation to place on this goal of perfection amongst as a supportive community. We all have to work on those prejudices. Mm-hmm. We all do. Because, dude, I was homeless myself, and I will still become jaded to the homeless. There's no magic bullet for that. It's a practice. Right. We practice anything.
What did, so you mentioned CR, Celebrate Recovery. Mm-hmm. How does Celebrate Recovery impact your sobriety?
CR was, for me, I was in service. So I was immediately trying to be of service to everyone around me, and it put me right in the middle of just the herd, so to speak, which is the safest place for me to be at that point. And I had a commitment to myself to stay here. I had a commitment to see this through, whatever that was. And for me, that meant just taking a bunch of suggestions and not making my own decisions and literally just handing off the will of my life to God and whoever else was around me that I felt could lead me in the right direction. And some of the members of CR at that time, and still to this day, they were that. They were great shepherds. They were good friends. They were the right people to listen to. They had been through it and they knew what was going on. And then that's where I had my first spiritual experience with God, in sobriety was at CR. And so it will always be the special thing. But when you look at Celebrate Recovery and another 12-step program, what you'll see is Celebrate Recovery is it's super huge community and lots of camaraderie, but they do lack a bit of the structure that is in a 12-step program. So if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict like me, you're going to need the structure. You're going to need the hard work and the resentment and the inventory and the amends and the continued service. You're going to need those things to stay sober. Now, you don't necessarily need the dogma of anything, whether it's a church or a 12-step program, but the tools that the 12 steps lay out in front of you I wouldn't be here today to having this conversation if it wasn't for them. So where CR, but some 12-step programs miss the mark on that community aspect because anonymity is a factor. But that's part of the problem. Well, not part of the problem. It's part of the challenge. CR is not really anonymous.
I've heard, people in the past talk about their ability to leave the recovery house. They're scared that they're going to go back to their old ways. Have you seen it to where you've had guys that just, they're not ready to put that next foot forward because they're afraid of going back to where they were?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I had I've seen guys, there's guys that have lived in sober programs for years, for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, have stayed in the same sober living. But, if we're being real honest, like those places need those guys. Sometimes, there's arguments to be made in both directions, but there's a guy at Kingdom, and he was in the documentary, John, and John is a fixture of that place. John is the guy that when you get there, you're getting in his truck, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, he's reading Proverbs and taking you to work. You know what I mean? Like, and those are two things you probably have not done in up of a decade. That program needs that guy to do that. That gives it the personal thing. And they have those guys and girls in every program. They become a part of the pillar that's holding up those programs. And I think that's important. I think you keep those people there if you can, so yeah. And they're scared to leave. I mean, they don't want to leave because this is home now.
Right. So how long did you end up staying in the recovery home?
18 months.
18 months.
Yep. I met my wife, and we found out about 15 months in that we were having a baby, and I had actually started to move out, and was literally in the process of like packing up some stuff, moving over, and David called me, and Philip had just turned that river house into we would be the first ones. So David called me up and said, "Hey man, would you mind staying like an extra month or two and like help me set up the program?" He's like, "I won't charge you anything. Just you help me set up this house over here and get it rolling, and then pass it off to the two guys that were there." Actually, the one that passed, that's in the documentary, was the guy I passed it off to at that time. But yeah, so I came back in for that, stayed another 2 months, 18, and then I left.
So we've had this long journey of a roller coaster of a life. I think it'd be a fair explanation, right?
Dude, I'll roll with that.
Roller coaster of a life. You've established new relationships.
Yes.
You have a wake of disaster that follows you. You leave the recovery home. You are a sober man, starting a life with your current wife, about to have a baby. When do you get into the arts of where you're at now?
Okay, that's a really fun question. So, growing up, my stepdad.
Can I pause you just for a second?
Yeah, please.
The reason. So, number one, redemption of your story is something that lots of people need to be able to hear that. But the thing that I really love about your story that we're going to get into next is that you are a man living on a street with nothing, massive addiction, and you're one of the top in your professions here locally. You come with such great respect, and I want people to be able to see that transition. It wasn't I don't imagine it was easy to get from where you were to where you're at now. It's a lot of hard work. But I want to see where that transition comes into play so that others hopefully can understand whatever their passion is, whatever they want to do, that tomorrow is a new day.
Yeah.
So talk to me about kind of how you got started with the videography and all the stuff that you do now.
Yeah. So when I grew up, my stepdad had he was a set photographer for James Bond back in the 80s. So he had a dark room in the house, and I grew up shooting on Minolta 35, just point and shoot cameras, and took that with me all the way through boarding school. I would go shoot Cruising the Coast on black and white film and stuff like that. So that was where the bug was. That's where I fell in love with it. But addiction, I put everything down. So camera went down, music went down. I played music for a long time in high school and loved jazz and funk music. So I was playing saxophone for years. So put that down, pawn the saxophone, so on and so forth. And so in sobriety, I loved talking with people. So I have the gift of gab, and I would always just I could sit and talk with someone about recovery or whatever they had been through, and I just loved hearing stories. And then if you think my story is any inkling of like powerful, there's so many more in town that are like can just show the power of like God and recovery in better ways. But I enjoyed those conversations. So we started a podcast, and we had Shop Talk Studios was born because I was doing logistics and mechanic work for DRP, and I worked in a shop, and we would always just, hang out and chat. And so I'd have guys that would show up at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and we'd talk for an hour about like what God was doing in their life or like what they were struggling with. It just became like a little fireside type deal. So that's where the name came from, was that just love of like talking with people. And, well, I'm sure, as you know, setting up a podcast, I bought the wrong cameras first, and then I had the wrong mics, and then I had this and that. And so it
gets expensive, doesn't it?
It's expensive and frustrating.
Yeah.
And I think at one point I had like a cell phone on one corner, a GoPro, and like something else, like a webcam, all trying to work together. And so I bought my first camera in sobriety, and it just fell in love, man. And you actually interviewed John Brascato.
Mm-hmm.
John, so I was in, and man, this is a good nod because this just shows you how well this community is connected together, right? So like I was working for DRP and was going to CrossFit Chivalry, and was integrating more and more into our little community here. And so I had the camera, and I would bring it to the gym to just practice and play. And like I would shoot stuff, and then I'd give it to Cassie. I would just give it to her. I was like, hey, I'm making this. We're trying some cameras out. Enjoy. And so I did that like 2 or 3 times, and she called me up, and she's like, and I don't really talk to her that much. I talk to John more, but she calls me up and she goes, hey, I like paid good money for a commercial that I couldn't even use because it was so bad. She's like, I've used like all of your commercials. You should think about doing this professionally. And I said, well, Cassie, I wouldn't even know like where to begin. Thank you. Like I was very appreciative of that, but I was like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Well, dude, she sent me like quotes and proposals and like contracts and like all the ins and out details that like I couldn't have, found on my own.
Right.
And gave me the like, took the excuse away to like not give it a shot. And so, I mean, the next, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the road, as one does, I mulled over it for far too long. You know what I mean? And so I made a pitch to a nonprofit in town about, hey, let me shoot a video for you. It'll cost this much. And it was, I think it was like $700 or $600 or something like that. And they laughed at me because it was so low. And so I was like, okay. And then they took the job. So I showed up in like literally my boots still covered in mortar and a high vis t-shirt with my like 2 lights and a camera. And I filmed this lady. So I owe a big push to the Brascatos. I love those guys. But yeah, so the podcast woke up the videography, and I fell in love with cinematography. I fell in love with lighting and intentionality and storytelling. And I'd always had a love for documentaries. And so TEDx was actually the first real commercial gig that we picked up. So I spoke in the first one. I got strong-armed by my buddy to speak in the first one. There was like 3 months left before it was going to go, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll help you write the story. We'll get it down. We'll get it. Don't worry about it." And so we did that one, and then the next year we partnered with him, and we filmed the whole thing. We did the production for it, and like the audio, everything, the whole 9 yards.
You did a really good job, and we're going to link that TEDx into our description here. I mean, the story, you went into a little more detail in some certain areas, so don't feel like you have to go back. We're going to link it, but I thought you did fantastic with it. And I told you before I got started, I didn't know that there was a TEDx ever came to West Monroe. And I think that stuff is cool. So you did your TEDx, you filmed that one commercial. How did you continue growing?
Okay. TEDx, well, first off, I'm going to just say it. I think everyone fakes it a little bit. They fake what they know a little bit. You bite off a little more than you can chew. You have
Fake it till you make it, right?
Yeah, you have a couple panic attacks, and then you're like, all right, I'm not going to do that again for a little while, and you push your boundary a little bit. But we did. So TEDx was pushing the boundary. I honestly took that TEDx, and then we had a like a narrative project for a rehab where it was going to be multiple videos with like a storyline, and we had gotten the podcast gave me a real leg into talking to people and getting them to talk to me in a way that was filmable, because it's as you guys know, it's someone may say something really good, but it doesn't always translate well.
Sure.
You know, so I was becoming better at that. So with TEDx, I found the technical problems. So I learned about time code. I learned about audio syncing and camera. You know, I learned about like color cast from green and magenta tones. You know, I learned a lot that was going to like really separate you out from a guy that just picks up a camera and goes do something, because he's missing all those experiential factors. And then I practiced lighting and still practice lighting all the time.
And I had no, you know, when we started this podcast, you know, you end up buying the wrong things or spending money in the wrong area. But man, I had no idea how much lighting, you know, we always think sound, you know, we got to have decent sound. I think sound is much easier to master than what lighting ever could be. It's there's an art to it.
100%. I mean, that's and I agree. Sound is easier today than it has ever been to get connected good and like really have a good quality audio coming out, especially that like radio sound that you really want to get, you know? But yeah, I am a sucker for cinematography, but there's a balance. So in the work that we do, we have certain clients that are like engaged in a lot of pre-production and they really want to deploy like a high production value. They want lighting, they want it to be well done. They want shot lists, you know, they want things like carefully curated. But then we also have clients that like don't want that, but can't afford the labor that goes into that. Sure. So the fun part for me is finding a way to like achieve those higher production looks, you know, without taking up a client's time for 4 hours, you know, or having to control a space that they might be profitable in. Like that's important, you know, like a lot of my clients, they don't have enough time. They need good video. They're willing to pay the ticket too. You know, like they're willing to pay the price for it, but they still are on a timeline where like, hey, I might be getting in the way of like, you know, a big deal they've got going on, right. Or like I might be slowing their production down for the day. So like I have to consider those things and then really gauge the space that I'm going to work in. Fortunately, most of the people we do a lot of subcontracting work. Like someone will hire us to go film on their behalf, and we will edit or color down that footage and send it back. And then some of them are projects that are all in-house, where like we're doing the pre-production, we're doing the client management, all the way down to like the creative design, out to final delivery.
How long did it take you from, you know, the first commercial that you did, and I would assume that you were still employed with a full-time job. How long did it take you to say, you know, I think we're going to take this thing full time?
Dude, I only recently, so fortunately, my job was, I did logistics. So we worked and developed an asset management system. And then we also did I was a DOT monitoring and compliance monitoring, and then we did audit stuff. So anyway, a lot of logistics, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of paperwork, a lot of due diligence. And so I got really, my brain works well in those systems. It likes those systems, but it's also a crippling factor for me because like I can get lost in the sauce of a system.
Sure.
But when they're in the right space and I'm doing the right things, they work really well. So I carried those systems with me into video, and really treated like workflow and production, and it's still refining it today. I just spent literally the last 3 days reworking our Monday program to like try to get it to have a better client experience, you know, because that's such a challenge for me. So, but yeah, so I consulted for DRP for another year, and my office is literally below their office still to this day. And so there's a guy that I passed it off to, and it took about a year to pass off the role to him. But that has been about 4 or 5 or 6 months now, where I'm no longer like at all doing anything for them, except for like they'll call me for an issue or something like that, and I'll step in and help.
Well, how did you find the time during that transition?
It wasn't.
I mean, you got a family, you've got a job, you've got a new career.
Yeah.
Where was that balance? How did you manage it?
Exercise.
You have to have a very supportive spouse.
100%. So our son was born, and dude, COVID hit like 11 months after, 12 months, a year after he was born. So he was like a year, 18 months old when COVID hit. So we immediately turned into like a tight unit. We don't have a big network here, like a family and all. In fact, we have none, you know, at that time. My mom still lived in Thibodaux, and we moved her. Like 3 years ago, we moved her up here. But so when COVID hit, there was no daycares, there was no school. He was still too young for any of the other stuff. She had didn't have a job because she had literally just gotten off of her pregnancy. You know what I mean? So we became a tight unit. Like we operated in like a very, I mean, we just worked and did what we could, you know, but we've always been pretty good about like making the time to do things together, especially like my schedule now is even crazier than it's ever been, where we filmed 2 weekends ago, we filmed overnight from Friday to Sunday, you know, so then we were in Indianapolis 2 weeks before that filming for 4 days. And then 2 weeks before that, we were actually in Utah filming for another, 5 days. And then Vegas was a week after that. So it was, there's a lot of like bouncing around and stuff like that. But when I'm home, I'm either painting miniatures and hanging out in my sunroom, or I'm with them. I mean, that's pretty much it. So but I have the benefit of like, my wife can come see me at my office and visit. My son just started school. He's on his like 3rd month of school, which he's doing great, which is awesome. But we had, I mean, she is hugely supportive and has never, ever backed off of like something that I thought I could do. I've never had to go explain myself in the sense of like justify what I want to do with a career or whatnot. She trusts me, and that's what I've been able to. That's what I've got. I
mean, knowing that you have that that rock at home probably makes it a lot easier. I know it does for me. A lot easier to be able to go out into the world and do the things that you love to do and do them well.
Yeah.
So I want to circle back to you mentioned 12-step program, and that's the accountability, going back and trying to correct that or make amends to that wave of destruction that you left behind. How important was that process to you to complete that? And actually, when I say complete it, I mean do it all the way. Just don't surface it. Hey, I'm sorry, we're going to kind of move on, we're good. But to really dive into those relationships that you tarnished. I know that you had mentioned that you had betrayed some friends along the way. Go into some of those experiences and share with us how hard that process was and what some of the outcomes, positive outcomes. And then, I mean, were there some situations where you were not able to make amends because they were just not receptive? There was too much hurt.
Yeah. No, I mean, do that. First off, to answer your first question, the amends process is absolutely essential, and you cannot skip it. There's no formula of this when in any program where like you making amends does not come into play. It is, if I find myself feeling irritable and discontent and resentful, there's probably somewhere in my life that I need to go back and make an amends. And I think that is shot through sobriety and recovery. I think it doesn't matter if you're never touched drugs and alcohol in your life, the ability to go back, own a problem, and then be willing to change something or fix something immediately to make that right. That's essential to being a good human being. But in recovery specifically, that is absolutely essential. So I had, up until I started the amends process, I had a sponsor of a specific variety that was aggressive, didn't put up and suffer with any fools, did not accept excuses, was every bit the rigidity that I needed in recovery, because I was a manipulator. I would talk my way out of things and justify and rationalize myself to death. But he was able to like see right through all that and cut down to the meat and potatoes of things, which was, man, when we write our inventory, and which is going to include a list of people that have harmed us and people that we've harmed, including institutions and all that stuff. 90% of that, it's all true, but 90% of that is kind of like you could get over it pretty quick. There's 10% on there though that's hanging you up. Like that might be, it's specific to everybody. Everybody hurts differently. You know what I mean? So for me, it was my relationship with my stepfather, relationship with my mom, and a lot of financial amends. I had several others that trickled down below that, like my Uncle James, who was my dad's best friend growing up, was absolutely like, he stepped in and became a huge, even in my addiction, when I had no cell phone, I could call him from a payphone and he would answer. Like, he was not an enabler, but he would 100% answer that call. So, and we have a relationship to this day. For example, my brother, my living brother, or half brother, we all lived in the same house. And once I got off bad, I have not been able to rekindle the relationship with him. So I've made attempts to go see him, and I've made the financial amends that I owed him, and so I've checked those boxes, but I've not been able to rekindle that relationship. And that one sucks. Like, if I'm being honest, I would love to have him in my son's life. I was there when his daughters were born, you know, and then just dipped. So it's on me, you know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's on me. But in those scenarios, we keep the door wide open is all we do. We say like, God, I'm willing to make this amends if the opportunity presents itself. Like I am willing today to talk to him today. And then stuff like with my stepfather, I tried like 3 or 4 times. One time we almost ended up in a fist fight. You know, next time he's drunk, and the next time it's it's denial. You know, we don't even want it. And so part of the problem for me with amends is my intentions. You know, like, am I making amends to help them heal? You know, or am I making amends for myself? And so like the answer is I'm there to clean my side of the street. So I'm there to own the things that are my fault and my problem and what I did, and then be willing to do something to make those right. But yeah, for example, like, my grandfather owed a financial amends to, and started that process, and he just wiped the slate clean. You know, he just is like, "Hey man, I'm just happy you're doing well. You know, I'm just proud of you for doing well," and it's sincere. And then I had one that it blew my mind. I had a possession charge and a paraphernalia charge still in Thibodaux when I was here in Monroe. And I had missed the court date for one. I was a habitual offender in Thibodaux, so that meant that if I went back in front of that judge again, I was going to go to jail. Like he had told me directly, if I see you again in my courtroom, you're going to go to jail. And so, of course, as an addict, I got another charge and was going to go back to see him. So, but I had like 90 days sober, 120 days sober, something like that. And my sponsor, since it was kind of an urgent thing, and I'd missed the court case, and there was a warrant now for this, and you know, it become emergent. You know, it was going to be a detriment to me. So me and my sponsor talked it over, and he's like, dude, you got 2 choices. He's like, you can drive your happy butt, you can get a ride to Thibodaux and go face the music and go see that judge and deal with whatever consequence you got to deal with for your actions, or you can call them and tell them that you don't want to leave here and you want to move it up to Monroe so you can handle it here. At least when you get out of jail, you'll be right down the road, you know? So that's what I did. I called him. I called the DA's office, and I told him straight up. I said, "Hey, look, I was landscaping at the time. I just had a temp job, and so I called him and I said, hey, look, I know I've got 2 warrants there, but I'm in a sober living program here in Monroe, Louisiana. I was like, I will give you guys the address. I would love if we could move all this stuff to Ouachita Parish so I could handle it, but I'm not coming back down to Lafourche Parish. I said, I'm just not going to do it. I said, if y'all have to send a cruiser, I totally understand, but I'm not going back down." They said, we'll call you back. So 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks later, something like that, I'm out landscaping it again. I get a phone call, and it's the district attorney herself. And she is calling me to tell me that they have like been looking forward to an opportunity to help someone, and like all these just mind-boggling, wonderful things. She just says all these things. And then she's like, hey, we've gone ahead and we've done what's called a nos procti, I think is what it's called. And we've dropped the charges, basically. So please continue on the right path. Like, this is why we're doing it, you know? And I didn't believe her. Yeah, I didn't believe her. So they mailed my mom like sealed document, like with the, you know, with like a waterpress seal into it that had the charges listed and then the like declaration from the district attorney or whatever. Wow. I kept that in my wallet, Brian, for like 3 years because I thought I was still going to get picked up on it. Like I didn't believe, you know what I mean? Like I couldn't grab that something that good would happen. But for example, what that did is that opened up the ability to get a driver's license, the ability to have more gainful employment, to purchase a vehicle at some point, to support my family. You know, like those amends ripple through my life, my kids' life, your life. They're shot through. Like I promise you that amends are half the reason why this town is just floating on like such a good recovery, because people are willing to like eat that crow when it's time to eat the crow. And it's something that's missing in general. Like we, as a population of, I can speak for men specifically, the ones coming up behind us and the ones above us, we're missing that desire to just drop the ego for a second. Like, you don't got to be right. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay to be wrong. And like, and it's even better if you can admit it. Like, you know, and face that music, because you're just going to learn. You know, it's so much easier to do that on the front end than to let it snowball into something, sure, you know, out of control.
But how many people feel like the challenge is so big that they can't tackle it themselves?
Are you speaking about recovery?
Or the all amends? Of it. Yeah. I mean, all of it. It's, you know, I take for granted that I've got a stable home life. I've got stability within my family to be there for me. But I just can imagine someone that knows no one in a town, and you have a sponsor that's with you, but the task is, just listen to you talk about, the task is huge. I mean, there's a wake of destruction that you have, and I didn't even know about these charges that you have, and just to make that telephone call, I mean, I can see how for some people it's too big of a hill for them to climb.
But if we're learning anything in this early days of recovery, is I'm not doing this without God. So like every step of that is me asking for God's will in my life. And if I'm asking for God's will in my life, that means I have to be prepared for what that is. It's not gonna be what I want. You know what I mean? It's just not gonna look like that, because I owe, in my mind, and I can't speak for everyone on this one, in my mind, there's a tax that I have to pay. You know, like although I know I was a victim of a disease of alcoholism and drug addiction, which was a result of whatever, right? I know those things, but I also accept responsibility for the things that I did. There's the split in our community is people can't have that. They can't have duality. They can't believe in two things at the same time. And that sucks, because it's like, hey, those are two very important distinctions. One is I am accepting responsibility for the consequences of my actions, but I also understand that like I'm not responsible for having an addiction. Does that make sense?
Maybe continuing the addiction.
Let me rephrase that. I'm not responsible for the disease of addiction.
Yes.
So,
yes.
But I am responsible for the choices I made.
Sure.
Those two distinctions mean that I can be empathetic and also hold someone accountable. They've got to live together. One without the other is tyrannical, and the other one is we let people walk all over us. So the middle of that is where sobriety lives for me. But in my mind, I owed that. So when I'm asking for God's will for my life, that means that I'm trusting Him to do with me what He can. You know,
and I believe that 100%. So would it be a fair statement to say, for those who are fighting addiction, they are truly wanting to make that change, but they're doing it without asking for God's help? Do you feel like that they're missing a big opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, when you hit, I think that people that are ready to get sober are ready to get sober. I think that for me, I woke up the last time I did drugs and realized that I didn't want to do drugs anymore. Now, I didn't have the like bright divine light, hit me and describe this. But what I did have was I had a sudden realization that everything that I was doing was not working, and I had exhausted all of my own options and will to fix this. I could no longer fix this.
Well, let me ask a question a little bit different.
Yeah,
so
please.
I think that there's a difference between getting clean initially, but it's staying clean. I'm sure you've seen a lot of people relapse in your time.
And die.
Do you give credit to your faith for not being in that position to relapse?
I thank God for the first step experience that I have, which is I wouldn't wish the way I felt on my worst enemy. And when I'm having a rough day, even if I can't talk to God in my head, or I'm all checked out and I'm not available and I've distanced myself from my relationship with my higher power, He gave me a vision into my first step experiences, which is how bad I felt at rock bottom. And I know that I would have to work real hard to make that happen again. My biggest fear, one of the biggest fears I had, so this is what I've gotten therapy for, is I am so scared that I can make a decision today that would put me back on the street. My therapist looks at me and he goes, Sam, do you realize how hard that would be? He said, do you realize that like where you are now is light years from where you were?
Right.
I believe what he's saying, but it's hard to feel that in the back of my head. And that's part of the same wreckage that I caused created that imposter that lives there, that doesn't feel worthy of those things, that doesn't feel like he deserves those things. And it's also part of the reason why I can also have an unhealthy work-life balance. I am very quick to dive into work and disappear there. So like there is, although my wife is a very strong individual, she suffers zero fools. You know what I'm saying? So when I'm out of that balance, she goes, hey, honey, you're going to burn out. And when you burn out, you crash. You physically crash. You go and you sleep for a day, and you know what I mean? And that's a reality of what I do, And so, but yeah, are they missing something? Yes, but the benefit is in a program like that, you don't have to nail it on the head. You just have to be willing to try.
Right.
That's it. And we talk about God doesn't make too hard of terms for people that are seeking him. If you're looking for him and you're just openly trying, he's going to show up. You're going to find him.
Agree,
he's there.
100%.
And so as long as we pass that knowledge on, that's why the 12 steps are important, because the first step is all about like me getting myself right. And then step 12 is no longer about me. Now it's about giving it back to somebody else. And it's cyclical. And I only keep that by giving it away. The documentary, working with others, like those are the altruistic ideas that we try to prop our lives up on. We all fall short and do things that are selfish and greedy, but that just happens.
So circling back to your business, I can, you love the art of storytelling, and your documentary shows that, perfectly. But talk to me about the transparency and the state of the media, the creative space for creators.
Yes.
Tell me some of the challenges that you see in that and that others may face that we could probably do a little bit better at.
Oh, man. There's a lot of gatekeeping in our community. In the sense of like, I was blessed to have friends like Cassie and John just blow the gates right off the door and like, no, we're not holding any information hostage. Like this is for you. But for example, we hire in a lot of help from the community. So like we hire guys in to come help us film. If we need crew, we hire them in to go do a bigger production. But we've got large productions happening in Monroe that don't involve a single local. They don't have anybody that lives here they're 7-figure jobs or 6-figure gigs that are going on right underneath our noses that we don't have. And part of that problem is there's a big gap between the mid-market and the upper market here. So for example, my day rate is attached to my literal overhead with 30% on it. You know what I mean? And there's no fluff in there. And if I lose anything on that, it's going to get sunk into post-production, right? So when we talk to our clients, we'll have approaches where people are like, they just want to quote. They don't really care about talking details. They don't want to know what the numbers are. They just want to know exactly how much it's going to cost to do this. Well, as you and I know, that's not possible.
That's not possible at all.
I can take time, spend it with you on the phone. We can go through what you want, and I can help you figure out what that's going to roughly cost. And I can get you 90% there, but I can't give you a haircut over the phone.
It's just like me going to someone calling me up and say, "Hey, Brian, I live in West Monroe. Tell me what my house is worth." I have no idea what your house is worth because I haven't seen it.
You got your roof?
What are we trying to achieve here? Yeah. So I get that.
So the way that we've bypassed that and has cost me money is we're just super transparent with our competition. We're super transparent with our clients, and our rate doesn't change. So we don't fluff up a job to make more because it's higher profile. This is what it costs to have my crew for 8 hours today, and this is what it costs for post-production. That's combined into a day rate. And then when we get to deliverables are where it gets tricky. So guys in the lower market they'll pack out a deliverable sheet. They'll put like 20 videos on there or 10 or 15 videos, and they might charge $1,000 or $2,000 to do that. And to them, it makes sense because they've got the like one-man band. It's just them out there. They feel like they can execute that, or they can't. They just don't know what they're doing. But what ends up happening is it sets precedents because people buy that over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so, it sets two precedents. One is that this work is cheap, and then also that the quality looks that way. So when I tell people that like, hey, we're going to spend an hour and a half setting up lighting for this shot, and then we're going to do about 3 or 4 shots in this space, the people that have experience in the business, that's great. They love that. They know what's going to come. They know they're going to get something that's controlled and produced and looks really well and is considerate. And then I have the clients where it's like they want me there with a camera and they want that same product, but they don't want to pay for the pre-production or the setup time and all that stuff. So we just shoot them straight off the hip. We're like, hey, this is what the day rate is. Also, videographers are not marketers, right? So cinematographers, photographers, production, that's not marketing. People don't want to pay for good marketing.
Right.
That's the bigger issue. We work with a marketer named Angelique. You might know Angelique, actually. Angelique Valerie?
I think I do, yeah.
Okay, so she works with us directly. She handles all of our marketing management, all that stuff. When I met her, I was asking for problems to solve. If you guys, for all my small businesses that are listening, if you call a marketer and say, hey, I want you to manage my social media, but you don't have a library of assets for that marketer to use, you're wasting your money.
Agreed.
Pay for both. get it done appropriately, and you won't regret it. So the problem is we turn and burn them. So we don't, but marketing in town does. Hey, I hired a social media manager 90 days down the road. I'm not happy with the results. Yeah, but did you pay for a photography? Did you pay for videography?
Right.
Did you come up with a plan?
Do you have quality content for them to be able to work with?
Because if not, you just gave them nothing. You just paid for nothing. And so what we end up seeing is people get a bad taste in their mouth for that type of management, where they're like, oh, I'm just going to cycle through these social media managers and marketers, and then they don't look at SEO, they don't look at keywording, they don't look at website development, they don't look at testing anything.
They're wasting a lot of money.
Right. And so the clients that I see that have the most success are the ones that hire the marketer first. They get them in the mix, and then the marketer looks and goes, hey, first off, I'm partnered with X, Y, and Z. It might be 3 production companies. This production company costs $5,000 a day. This one costs $3,000 a day. And this is a kid with a camera for $500. So like, you can pick any one of these. I'm going to recommend you go with the $5,000 or the $3,000 guy and get something that you can use. So we offer something to tailor to those people. We say, hey, look, you're not ready for a big production. You're not ready to spend, upwards of $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 on a project. I get it. We're going to offer you a content day. Get your marketer. Y'all figure out some simple short form ideas, and we will apply a higher level of production value to those ideas. And then we'll shoot everything we can in that day, and that's your deliverables, what you get out of there. It works great. It pads their accounts. They get 7 or 8 good reels. They get a little photography spread. Everyone makes money, and they actually have usable assets that will benefit their business that aren't just cookie cutter templated Canva graphics. Like, it doesn't work like that. Yeah. Dude, I don't know about you, but like, I see a Canva graphic and I immediately recognize it right next to the ChatGPT script, and I go, and I zoom right past that. So, I mean, getting the market of businesses to understand what is what would help.
So it's also relationships, and so my business is based on relationship. Most service related industry, you have to have a well-established relationship. Mm-hmm. And within a relationship, you have a genuine relationship, or you have a superficial fake relationship. And I think from a marketing standpoint, people need to put that into practice, that if you're going to just have the Canva stuff or the boilerplate stuff, that's a very superficial relationship that you're trying to push out for your customers.
That's a great way to say it.
But to have that deep, lasting relationship means you took the time to tell a story in a quality way where people can digest that story, where they can get involved in that story or relate to that story. So I'm with you 100%. I think if a lot of these people who pay marketing companies, which I do believe in them,
of course,
I know a lot of great ones that are out there. If you're willing to spend the money and do it right the first time, it will save you so much more money. They look at that big ticket item, say, there's no way I can afford that. But you're going to pay that person, $500 a day to do this for X number of days, and you're going to pay for this many ads, to where that $500 you paid that guy is producing crappy ads, ad spend for your money. Then if you would have done it right to begin with, I think long run they're going to save money.
Oh, I agree. I would even go as far to say that, like, the without investing in the good video and photo, you're wasting money. Like, you're in a market now that only responds to video and photo, and it's hard to even say. So, for example, Webster's a good friend of ours. I watch the way he works, and Webster is a high volume. He has got it down to a science, and he knows what he's doing. And but with real estate, you guys have to have those photos up. Like, you can't list without it.
That's right.
Okay, so that's a big deal. That means that, like, the value of Webster's services are not, I'm going to disclaim this because he's a good friend of mine. He takes the best real estate photography in probably the state. I would have zero questions sending him to anyone, right?
And that's why we use it.
Right. But I'll say this, I think the value he is actually providing is your turnaround time. So his ability to get those photos back to you in a prompt time is where the actual value comes from. So, like, yes, they need to be high quality, but now that that's nicked in the bud, the fact that he is able to get that to you in a 24-hour, 48-hour turnaround, that's huge, dude.
It is, and I think that, as his business has grown, I'm still surprised that I'm able to get 24-hour turn from it, and I'm thankful. So, Webster, if you're listening to this, don't extend me out if you don't have to. But he's good. He's a true professional,
yes.
And I think in the very beginning when he was getting started, and I may be putting words in his mouth here, so give me a little grace on this. People didn't see the benefit of photography, paying the money that he charged, which is extremely equitable. Yeah, I mean it's a fantastic price that he offers, and they just could not see spending that money because they don't think that. Well, I mean, good enough is good enough. Well, I don't believe if we're going to offer a quality product to our customers, good enough should never be good enough.
Be the best.
We should be the best.
Yeah.
Be the best at what we do. Well, man, I've had a true pleasure speaking with you today,
absolutely.
and your story is impactful. My takeaway from this is that redemption is available for those who want it.
Absolutely.
It does take hard work. You didn't create this business overnight.
No.
Your sobriety was a path. It wasn't a take this pill and snap, we're there. And it's an ongoing process. I really appreciate your advocacy for the creators in the space, but also advocacy for the empathy that we should have for people that were in your space. I think it was on the documentary that I watched where you told. Can you tell real quick the story of your wife wanting to give someone on the side of the road a little bit of money? Because I mean that really touched me on that.
Yeah, we had been married for a year or two, and we were riding around, and I had gotten in one of those phases of my life where I was busy and disconnected from the people around me, and was not fit. I wasn't active in my recovery, and I was just kind of like coasting and working, and because if the devil can't do anything, he'll make you busy. You know what I mean? And so we're driving, and we hit the Louisville Bridge right there, where you always see a panhandler, and she stopped and gave some change, and I forget how it played out all the way, but I opened up her center console, and she's got this like big wad of cash in there, and for me, I don't do that. I like my cash always got to be picked up and safe somewhere, and so I didn't get onto her. I was like, hey, what do you do? Why do you have this fistful of cash in this thing? I was like, she's like, oh, that's what I give people on the corner, and I said, okay, honey, and we talked for a little bit, and I was jaded. I didn't want to give the guy money. I didn't want to stop and give them money, which is hysterical and incredibly ironic and sad to my that state of mind I had at the time. But she said, I mean, cold as day, she looked at me. She said, Samuel, she said, you never know. That might be someone else's Samuel. And I mean, it just slammed me like a ton of bricks when she said that. It also made me fall more in love with my wife. You know what I mean? But I think when you look at people and you can't see that they're hurting, you're missing the point. And I think that if you're worried about the money and you're worried about the panhandling and you're worried about the crime, it all starts back at the grassroots. It only gets better if the whole community jumps on board. And, people will side one way or the other, and they'll say, well, that's not my responsibility. And I say, well, no, it is. Like you live in a community, you call yourself a citizen of this town or state or whatever you want to say. And then if you look back, and I won't drag us out, I know we got to end, but if you look back far enough, even we have a sacred duty to our neighbor, and that's what that is. And like our community gets better when we stop seeing the problem and we start seeing the person. It's hands down what it is. Because you never know, dude. Like you don't know what that person has been through and what has led them to that point. And if you think that being cruel or mean or limiting or judgmental or prejudiced or racist or bigot, like if you think that any of those things are going to do anything other than make the problem last longer, you were mistaken. Like you need a real good look at yourself and see, because like the other truth that people avoid is that no one is untouched by addiction and mental health. Everyone in their lives has experienced, a person or a friend or themselves has gone through something just like that. Yeah. And no one's immune from it, dude. You, me, everyone in this room could immediately fall victim to the same things that I fell victim to, just like that. You could have a car accident, have a back problem, and next thing you know, you've got pain pills for the rest of your life. It's not hard. It's not hard to fall in those traps. So, yeah, it's not complicated. Just love people where they're at.
Love that. Yeah. Samuel, thanks for coming in and sharing your story with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
And I can't wait for the release of the documentary to be able to come out.
I'm excited. I will obviously I don't know where it'll live yet, but when it lives somewhere, I'll make sure to give it to you. So
Thank you, sir.
cool, dude.
Thank you for taking the time to watch or listen to this podcast. We really appreciate your involvement. Please leave us a comment, or even better yet, subscribe to this podcast and hit that notification bell so that you can be alerted for every new episode when it hits.